good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. We're really glad that you decided to spend this hour with us. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of members of our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine and former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Thank you and welcome to this morning's guest joining us from Israel, hence the 10 o'clock a.m. Sunday morning time, Aluf Benn, editor-in-chief of Haaretz, and welcome and thanks to today's moderator, Madeleine Brand. Reminding you that tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific, we'll welcome Ken Burns, a renowned filmmaker who will provide his perspective on the state of American life and politics from his very brilliant and unique lens. Now to introduce and engage our guest this morning, please welcome the wonderful Madeleine Brand. Madeleine is the host of the award-winning daily news and culture show Press Play, on which she covers national, international, and local stories through a Southern California lens. Madeleine has hosted and reported for NPR and for affiliate stations for more than 30 years. She has a master's degree from Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where she also taught documentary radio. Out of respect for my partner in this project, Mel Levine, I will share that Madeleine's undergraduate degree is from none other than his beloved University of California at Berkeley. And he would say, go Bears. I'm a Bruin, as is Zev, but we will respect our Bears today. Madeleine?
Thank you so much. Thank you for that respect, and back at you, Janice and Zev and Mel. And thank you so much for having me back. And Aluf, great to have you back as well to America to Crossroads.
Thank you.
Quick and good evening to you, because it's 8 o'clock in Israel right now. So
it is.
Thank you for being here. And for people who do not know Aluf, Aluf is one of the best interpreters of Israeli politics and what is happening in the region. So we're very lucky to have him, for him to carve out an hour of his Sunday evening to be with us. He has, for the last 13 years, been the editor-in-chief of Haaretz. He's a veteran national security correspondent. He's been published all over the world, including the New York Times, Foreign Affairs, The Guardian, and on and on. And Aluf, let's just get right into it and begin with the big news, and that is the assassination of Nasrallah, who ran Hezbollah for more than 3 decades, was in fact the de facto leader, I guess, of Lebanon, really, when you think of his power. So he was able to amass a formidable army, 50,000 or so people, according to the CIA. His killing is a massive event. It's not just yet another political assassination. It's been a few days now. How is it settling? What are the reactions in Israel, in Lebanon, in Syria, and beyond?
Well, in Israel, there's a lot of joy. Nasrallah was for many years, for at least 25 years since the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000, and even more so since the Second Lebanon War in 2006, he was seen as the arch enemy, a very sophisticated leader of Israel's enemies, the one who understands Israel better than us, who knows how to play Israel's leaders, how to play on Israel's weaknesses, and with Iran's support, sponsorship, and help, build a very formidable fighting force, both in terms of kind of infantry units that were mostly deployed in the Syrian civil war on the side of Bashar al-Assad. But from an Israeli perspective, the scarier force was an arsenal of long-range missiles, rockets, that is able to hit any target in Israel, including guided missiles that could hit airports, army bases, power stations, etc. So there was a lot of fear of Hezbollah in Israel for many years, and it was seen as the main enemy by any standard. So much so that the Israeli military and intelligence were so focused on the north that they neglected the south, which enabled Hamas to attack Israel by surprise a year ago. And what we've seen in the past 2 weeks, the assassination of Nasrallah was not just a one-time hit of a senior person, in the same way that Israel assassinated his predecessor, Abbas Mousavi, in 1992. It's part of what we see now as a developing strategic bombing offensive beginning with the attack on the pagers and walkie-talkies of, I would say, the middle echelon and some of the higher echelons of Hezbollah, incapacitating 1,500 people by their admission, who have lost their eyesight or limbs or other body parts and cannot be counted as fighters or commanders or be deployed. Then Israel assassinated the top command, operational command of Hezbollah, and then Nasrallah and the Iranian general in charge of that area of the Middle East and some others of the Hezbollah echelon, along with bombing hundreds and thousands of targets, including a lot of these rockets and missiles in Lebanon. And beyond, there was an attack on a Syrian facility that was used by Iran, Hezbollah, to build these missile guidance systems. And today, Israel bombed, I think, the heaviest bombing in terms of the combination of the number of aircraft and the distance, bombed the infrastructure of Yemen, the Houthi-controlled Yemen. The Houthis, since the beginning of the war, blocked the seaway to Israeli port of Eilat on the Red Sea, and basically shut it down by attacking commercial ships. And then they fired long-range missiles. The last one was fired 2 days ago to Israel. It was intercepted, but still Israel once bombed the Yemenite port of Hodeidah, and today it bombed the port and power stations. Now when you bomb a power station, it's a long-term damage. You cannot rebuild it. Even in the most developed state, you cannot rebuild a power station tomorrow morning. It takes years. So it's a very heavy blow. And then we see also open threats by Prime Minister Netanyahu, by other Israeli officials to Iran, that if it joins the fray, it would suffer the same. So we see here as an Israeli offensive. Now, when you look at the reaction inside Israel, I think the most important thing is that Israelis once again have been able to trust the Air Force, the intelligence services that they could not function. When Hamas attacked on October 7, it took the Air Force hours to deploy attack helicopters there. It took the army hours to regroup. So some of the villages were not saved, could not be saved. So there was justified mistrust in the abilities of these strategic arms of Israel. And what we've seen in the past 2 weeks was the opposite. So people, once again, the mainstream media is joyful, and Netanyahu is joyful, everybody's happy, and the Israeli Jewish society is once again, I would say, more united than at any point since October 7, if not behind Netanyahu, then at least behind the military and Israel returned to itself. As for the wider region, there were mixed reactions. Some of those people, especially in Syria or in Lebanon, who suffered the fists of Hezbollah during the civil wars, both in Lebanon and in Syria. To them, Nasrallah was an enemy just like Israel. That doesn't make them pro-Israelis or disciples of Netanyahu or Zionists, but clearly, along with those who mourn Nasrallah, and to them he was the leader of resistance to Israel and the United States in the region, the one guy who stood up to the pressures of the US and Israel for 32 years, was able to kick Israel out of Lebanon, was able to defeat Israel in the Second Lebanon War. Clearly, to them, it's a big loss.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about the political ramifications for Netanyahu in a moment,
Sure.
but first, I just want to ask you about the military strategy here. So we had the series of events, the pagers, and the walkie-talkies, and then these assassinations. It was all of this planned together, because there's been reporting that Israel had to enact its pager operation because Hezbollah had discovered it, and before it had wanted to do so. But was the entire thing planned, or is it like one thing after another, kind of a
Look,
roll?
clearly, you cannot improvise such a bombing offensive. You cannot improvise. Air forces are, very organized forces. They need to plan. They need to amass enough munitions. The air defense systems need to have enough interceptors to counter the enemy attacks, etc. It takes time to shape these plans, to collect intelligence. It's not just even if the pager attack was the timing, and even the pager attack, you need to, for years, to have a foot in the acquisition system of the enemy, and then to channel them to buy these pagers and not others, and to be able to supply them undetected, etc. So these operations take a long time to plan and to carry out. And even if the timing was influenced by a fluke, it took a while to build this force. It's not an improvisation. It was planned, and for years, the military used to tell us in briefings that one day we'll show you what we can do. Whenever we asked, how can you fight Hezbollah with all their missiles that could destroy Tel Aviv and our economic centers and Haifa and the ports and the airports and the power stations? The military leaders were always telling us that we have no idea about the Israeli capabilities, and that one day we're going to see them, and more or less this is what we've seen in the past 2 weeks. So it was planned. Now, if you zoom out and look at it strategically, what happened since October 7th, since October 8th, actually, was that Iran was able to deploy the area of resistance, the linkage of multi-front war against Israel. So for the first time, the Palestinians, Hamas, were not left alone to face the wrath of the Israeli power, but were aided by Hezbollah in the north, by the Houthis in the deeper south, by some militias in Iraq firing at Israel, blockading the port of Eilat, forcing the IDF to deploy a large force in the north rather than use all its force against Hamas, forcing Israel to evacuate tens of thousands of its inhabitants along the border, which happened on the Lebanese side as well. But Israel faced many problems due to that, and it offered a deal to Hezbollah. The U.S. and France were trying to broker a deal of ceasefire in the north. Hezbollah and Nasrallah said, no, we reject it. We'll never leave the Palestinians alone. We'll keep fighting. If you want to stop us firing at you, stop the war in Gaza. To which Israel responded, okay, if you insist on the linkage, we will break it apart by force. So it was all in the air. It was not something that Israeli leaders, especially Defense Minister Gallant and some of the military leaders, and occasionally Netanyahu, they were always, since the beginning of they were saying that in time will shift they would shift the center of gravity to the north.
Right.
And it happened.
For many years, they wanted to get rid of Nasrallah, and before October.
Nasrallah and his force, not just Nasrallah the person.
The whole thing. So now that it has been decapitated, so to speak, Hezbollah, not just Nasrallah, but also leading commanders, and many of its fighters grievously injured, if not killed, by these cell phones and pagers going off. So what does that mean for the ability of Hezbollah to regroup and continue fighting and sending missiles across the border? Is this it for a while? I've heard a lot of analysts say that it'll take years to be able to find someone to replace Nasrallah.
Well, that, we can never know. We can never know. His cousin is the heir apparent, and if he survives this war, he can rebuild Hezbollah in his own shape it by his own attitude, but it's too early to tell. So far, Hezbollah kept firing rockets into northern Israel every day, and that's why even without Nasrallah, Israel cannot bring back its dwellers to the northern towns and kibbutzim and villages and so on, because of the cross-border fire. So there's a lot of pressure inside Israel to launch a ground offensive into Lebanon and to reoccupy or at least part of the security zone that Israel held there until 2000. But this time, following the example of Gaza, driving out the local population, at least from the Shiite villages that were Hezbollah's bases, and destroying them, and just deploy this scorched earth policy that we see in Gaza. And I think that one thing that the Gaza war did for the Israeli army and for the public opinion of the army was that for years ground offensives were seen as taboo because of the fear of military casualties. And in Gaza, the IDF proved that it could deploy a huge force with much less. Every casualty means the world to the family and the unit and so on. But in terms of the total death toll, it was much less than anticipated before the war. So now there's a lot of pressure. If you could do it in Gaza, do it in Lebanon, which is more complicated.
It's a different army. It's a different.
Definitely. It's a different army. It's a different terrain. It's a different capability of Hezbollah as ground fighters. So far, we have not seen serious calling reserves and deploying massive forces in Gaza, but it's still in the air because the air offensive cannot bring back the dwellers to the north. So what we might see in the coming days, this is the big question. If Israel is able to tear apart the area of resistance and force Iran into begging for a ceasefire, taking out Hezbollah and the Houthis out of the war, and then leaving Israel to deal with Hamas alone and trying to impose a better deal with Hamas on hostage return, prisoner exchange, and the different deployment in Gaza, that remains to be seen. So far, it's going on. It's not over.
Which brings up Iran, and NBC News is reporting that Iran is going to send troops to Lebanon in the coming days. I don't know if you've been able to confirm that.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know. This is, it appeared to me, I saw this report, which is bizarre because these soldiers, there's no border between Iran and Lebanon. So they must cross through Syria and through Iraq and Syria. And doing that will expose them to the wrath of the Israeli air superiority. They have no way to protect these forces from air attacks. They have no tunnels going all the way underground from Iran to Lebanon. So I think they were taken by surprise. Look, just like Israel was taken by total surprise on October 7th, although it knew about the capabilities of Hamas and the training of Hamas and so on, the Iran and Hezbollah were taken by total surprise. Even after Israel assassinated these leaders, they still kept coming to their offices. And so I don't think that they believed that Israel would dare to kill Nasrallah or to deploy such massive force against Yemen and so on. And now so now in Iran they're paralyzed and they need to figure out what to do. But in whatever they do, they're facing the Americans as well, because the U.S., unlike its, I would not say half-hearted, but three-quarter-hearted support for the war in Gaza and the way Israel conducted the war in Gaza. In the case of Lebanon and Yemen, they gave total support and they gave all these munitions to the Israeli Air Force and the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's, when you fly to Yemen, you need more coordination with America. So in that sense, the inclusion of Israel into CENTCOM, into the area of responsibility of the American Central Command, in the final days of the Trump administration, from a strategic standpoint, was a very big contribution to Israel's security and to its integration in the region, in the regional defense system. We saw it in April when Iran attacked Israel with hundreds of missiles and drones and cruise missiles, and you saw America and Britain and France and some of the Arab neighbors of Israel all joining forces together with the Israeli Air Force to protect. And by what we hear from the Biden administration, Iran is going to face a similar coalition if it tries again.
However, the United States and France and some others were working on a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon before this assassination took place. And apparently, the United States says it was not briefed by Israel before this happened, maybe during, but not before. So it happened as Netanyahu was in New York giving a speech to the United Nations General Assembly. So it does raise the question as to how much sway the United States has when it comes to Israel and fighting these wars, both in Gaza and Lebanon.
Well, potentially it has all the sway in the world. Practically, not much. I think it did slow down the Israeli use of air power in Gaza and forced Israel to change tactics there and rely more on small ground forces and occasional, more pinpointed airstrikes against suspected Hamas areas of operation or commanders. But in Lebanon, of course, Israel and the United States, it's very convenient to both sides not to have America know in advance what Israel is trying to bomb. Why expose the Americans to Iranian or Hezbollah retaliation? But look, the CENTCOM commander was in Israel a couple of days before the attack. He was briefed on the Israeli general plans, and again, you cannot just fly wherever you want in the Middle East. You have all the American early warning systems deployed in Israel, around Israel. You cannot just, if you have even the Russians there, you can't just go wherever you want and nobody sees you. It's all part of the same defensive system.
So you're saying they did know, but they didn't know.
Exactly. They knew I believe that they knew to the extent that was convenient to either side for the Americans to deny prior knowledge, but knowing enough to be prepared. Look, if you're putting your allies in jeopardy by your actions, you need to give them some heads up before it. And today with Yemen, Israel, I saw that Israel announced that it coordinated it with the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But why make the U.S. an accomplice in the assassination of a leader like Nasrallah? I don't see the point.
Right.
They don't want to know.
So meanwhile, it appears the United States is giving up on trying to broker a ceasefire proposal in Gaza. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that. There were repeated proposals on the table, and tell us who was largely responsible for them not working.
Well, at the beginning, Hamas felt victorious, and I think it's the problem of both sides. The big question here, and I have no straight answer, is whether Netanyahu, from the beginning, knew that he would not be willing to pay the price demanded by Hamas, which is twofold. It's full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza to the pre-war lines, and the release of thousands of Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons. And that includes some of the leaders of the Second Intifada responsible for the suicide bombings at the time, and some of the perpetrators of the October 7 massacre. So politically, Netanyahu was and is under pressure from his far-right coalition partners not to accept such a deal. But I believe that it was also his own idea, that not to repeat the mistake of releasing 1,000 Palestinians for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, 13 years ago, which in one of those release was Yahya Sinwar, who the perpetrator, the Hamas leader, the chief perpetrator of October 7. So I believe that Netanyahu would not agree to such a deal. And for Hamas, was not the case as well. They still insist on their demands, and there was no real middle ground here to broker a ceasefire. With Lebanon, it was different because the main demand of Hezbollah was a ceasefire in Gaza, not just a ceasefire in Lebanon. And also the Israeli demand is for Hezbollah to withdraw behind the Litani River, to be away from the border, so they would not be able to conduct their own version of October 7th. So far, I've yet to see the mechanism to oversee such withdrawal. So there was no real meeting of minds there. Clearly now it's different because Israel could go on destroying Lebanon, and if there are forces in Lebanon who could, or Iran who wants to save what remains of Hezbollah for the future, that might have second thoughts about such a ceasefire.
How long can Israel wage a two-front war?
In Gaza, it's not deploying such a huge force now. Hamas was hit very hard. Hamas cannot function now as a fighting army. They could use guerrilla tactics against Israeli forces, but their ability to fire rockets at Israel is severely, almost entirely reduced. So the problem is that they still keep the hostages. And this is really the thorniest issue in Israeli public opinion, because the Netanyahu manipulated the hostage families in a way that portrayed them as the only card in the deck of the opposition. So throughout the war, the only cause for the opposition or for the anti-Netanyahu camp was free the hostages now. And he was able to show that, and some of his supporters even attacked the hostage families, claiming that they were less than patriotic and helping the enemy. So this is still the thorniest issue in Israel, and the killing of Nasrallah or any other leader of the enemy or any bombing anywhere is not going to help these people. And moving the focus of attention to the north is the scariest thing for the hostage families, because their beloved ones are still in Gaza. Netanyahu argues that out of the 101 hostages, about half are alive. But from what we saw when Hamas murdered the 6 hostages in the tunnel a month ago, we've seen that they were held in such horrible conditions, and that's still a big issue, which is not just about fighting the war. It's about trying to come to terms with Hamas and bringing them home. These are the only assets that Hamas still has. And regardless of Netanyahu's effort to turn them into a liability for Hamas, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't bring them back.
And there are weekly protests in Tel Aviv and elsewhere against.
Yes, but after the murder of the 6 hostages was the largest demonstration since the beginning of the war, the largest demonstration to bring them back. Once again, Netanyahu hesitated to fire Defense Minister Gallant, who is more identified with the hostage deal, and is his only political rival in the cabinet, although they're from the same party. But after that, and with the shift to the north, the protests once again winding down.
So let's get to the political fallout or benefit for Netanyahu now. Is he now able to reclaim that mantle of being the big security force that will protect Israel from all enemies from without? Is he more popular now than he was ever since October 7th?
I believe he is, although we have yet to see more updated polls, which we haven't seen. But he's now expanded his coalition. He brought back Gideon Sa'ar, a former friend who became his biggest foe in the right wing, and basically crawled back to the coalition without any agreement, and hoping to be able to return to Likud and to be able to be a front runner in the, if one day there's a post-Netanyahu contest to lead the Likud, to be there. I think that Netanyahu is now more accepted by the center, because and for the first time since the beginning of the war, he had his picture taken or publicized with the chief of staff. But I don't think it's enough for the hardcore anti-Bibiists. It's not enough. Nothing will erase his responsibility for the October 7 failure or the neglect of the hostages. But I don't think that these people would have voted for him anyway. Right. So it gives him, clearly the expansion of the coalition gives him more leeway vis-a-vis his far-right partners. And if he is indeed more popular and able to recover from his lagging behind in the polls, erase the other contenders like Naftali Bennett, former Prime Minister Bennett, to replace him, he might be tempted to call a snap election early next year, which would give him once again controlling the process rather than being dragged by his partners. Number two, once again kicking away to the future the thorny issue of Haredi, of the ultra-Orthodox draft, which this coalition is not able to solve. And also delay his testimony in his corruption trial, which is scheduled for December, and is not even prepared for it. But calling an election would just kick it down the road. So
what would that
he
mean
might be tempted to do that.
What would that mean for the far right, for Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich?
Well, again, by expanding the coalition with Sar, they're weakened because they cannot. Ben-Gvir cannot topple the coalition on his own. Smotrich theoretically could, but Smotrich is so lagging behind in the polls that for him it's going to be suicidal, political suicide. So Netanyahu has more room to maneuver. But so far we have not seen a real ideological debate between Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich. We have not seen it. It's just a story that more moderate Israelis like to tell themselves, that that Netanyahu is the moderate held captive by these crazies in the far right. And for Netanyahu likes always to portray himself as being dragged, being forced into decisions by the powers that be it the coalition or the American president or public opinion or his wife or his son. He never likes to take responsibility for unpopular decisions or for controversial decisions, and is willing to be portrayed as a weakling or under pressure and so on, but to keep going. And he's still in power, so this this trick has been working for him for 15 years.
Pretty remarkable, right? I mean, after October 7th, nobody liked him, and
nobody liked him, and he never took one iota of responsibility for what happened, putting all the blame on the military, and now obviously claiming all the glory for himself. Well, to be honest, Netanyahu is not inventing anything new. He's always operating the same way, cracking the opposition parties and finding the weak spot there, and luring these people into his coalition to extend its to give it some more time in office in return for empty jobs. It worked for him time and again, and now it's working with Gideon Sa'ar. And the opposition, by the way, especially the more security-minded opposition leaders like former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz and the former Deputy Chief of Staff Yair Golan, who is now leading the left-wing Zionist party, they are all cheering and pushing the government to attack Lebanon even with ground forces. And today Golan, the left-wing leader, the presumed left-wing leader, called openly to occupy a village in Lebanon because it's on the other side of the hill overlooking an Israeli now evacuated kibbutz. Now, if that's the opposition, my argument has been throughout the war, by the way. A lot has changed since our last conversation in April, but a lot has stayed the same. And I think the most important thing politically is that even with Netanyahu unpopular or less popular, his policy and his government policy is extremely popular in the Israeli Jewish society. And that is to keep the war going until Hamas and Hezbollah and all these bad guys are defeated. And clearly what happened in the past few weeks and days only makes it more popular. But with the opposition begging him to occupy Lebanon, it reminds me of the first Lebanon war in 1982 when Beirut was under siege. And at that time, there were two senior military commanders. One was a brigade commander of the armored, of a tank brigade, who refused to take part in the occupation of West Beirut because of the fear for civilian life there. At that time, Yasser Arafat and the PLO were under siege. And eventually he was relieved of command and some other people occupied Beirut. But today, there are no voices like that in the Israeli army or even in public opinion. But Golan reminds me of Yitzhak Rabin, who was then one of the opposition leaders who begged Begin and Sharon, the government leaders, to tighten the siege of Beirut. So with the opposition calling the military, the government to be more aggressive, what problem is there for Netanyahu? The anti-Bibiist claim is not about because the opposition is worrying about the Palestinians or about the death and destruction in Gaza or in Lebanon or elsewhere. It's about the feeling that the right-wing government is fighting us and is trying to curb our freedoms, especially vis-a-vis religious life and so on, and to drive the former elites out of power and give more resources to the coalition base of more conservative and more religious Israeli Jews. That has not changed, and the government and the coalition and Netanyahu are working full speed to gain one more inch, one more slot, one more committee, one more legal point to score, and so on. That is the main contention, and the hostages, but not the war. There is no strong anti-war sentiment. There is a very strong anti-war sentiment in the Israeli Arab society, but it's been quite marginalized since October 7th and silenced.
And so it looks like this war could go on indefinitely. How long can this go on? It's the year anniversary is coming up, and there are no calls to end this decisively?
No, the calls were to bring back the hostages and then resume the fighting. Okay. So for the government, the strategy is to occupy Gaza or to occupy it to slice it in half, and then there is a debate whether Israel should drive out the remaining Palestinians in the northern part of Gaza, including Gaza City, and just to clear it from Palestinians. And eventually, that's the call of the right to people to the right of Netanyahu to resettle there and basically, practically annex it into Israel and then let Hamas rule over the remaining 2 million Palestinians in southern Gaza in tents and without any infrastructure or social welfare systems. That's one debate in Israel. And the opposition is not, the opposition's main thing was to bring back the hostages. And then if you need to enter Gaza again, do it. So there's no real anti-war per se voice in Israeli Jewish society at all.
How likely is it, do you think? This seemed unbelievable just a few months ago, but now how likely do you think it is that Israel would annex part of Gaza and go back in?
I think it's very likely. I think it's very likely. I don't see at this point. I don't see practical opposition to that either in Israel or outside. But it's a long process. Look, the West Bank settlements to reach their current status, it took almost 60 years. So it's not it's a very long-term process. But I don't see any calls in Israel today to withdraw from Gaza to the October 6 lines, rebuild the fence and the whatever defenses were there, or improve them and just bring back to the kibbutzniks and the other dwellers and just forget about it. I don't see it happening.
So the
Israel insists
strategy-
on controlling the Gaza-Egypt border. Israel insists on controlling the Netzarim corridor that slices Gaza in half. It insists on controlling the cordon of 1 kilometer width along the border. Altogether, it's a large chunk of the very small area of Gaza, and the rest of it is still in ruins. So it's going to take decades to rebuild. But it's not even discussed almost in the Israeli public discourse. Israeli television doesn't show the damage, death, and destruction in Gaza that you see in channels outside of Israel. It's very reported, and it's not part of the public discourse at all.
Why
And
is that? Why this is a free media that's not controlled,
Because they don't think that their viewers would like to see it. Because after October 7, the Palestinians had it coming. They brought it upon themselves. And most Jewish Israelis don't feel any pity for them, or for the Lebanese, for that matter. Along with Nasrallah, hundreds of people who lived in the apartments, the buildings above the command center were also killed. There was zero discussion of it in Israel.
And it's about what, 500 people so far, at least?
I think they said 300. I don't know.
In total, though.
Yeah, but we don't know how many people were in the command center. So, but clearly, when you wipe out residential buildings like that, nobody survived.
Somebody's asking, who are you referring to when you say Jewish Israelis? Religious or both religious?
No, I'm just no, not religious. I'm saying Jewish by ethnicity. You have Jewish Israelis and you have Arab Israelis. We have very, very distinct, different views about the war. Not necessarily, well, they have both the Jewish and the Arab society are not monoliths. They have a lot of inner debates within themselves. But clearly, by and large, the Arab society, from day one, begged for a ceasefire and prisoner exchange, while the Jewish society, again, by and large, I don't know if I didn't count anybody and asked any resident of Israel, but by and large, the Jewish society is about defeating Hamas and Hezbollah and getting rid of the threat. And we have what we call sobriety. People were in the left, and before the war, were all about relieving the siege, the blockade of Gaza, and reaching out to the Palestinians. Now we're saying we cannot trust them, and all we need to do is to use more force. The belief that force is a panacea is very strong in the Israeli Jewish society for years, and it just replays itself now.
So the plan is to move all the Gazans from the north to the south of Philadelphia. Where would that?
No. South of The Gaza is split almost in half. If you have, if this is Gaza, so you have here the Netzarim corridor.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the Palestinians are internal refugees in this part, in the central and southern part of Gaza. In the northern part, that used to be Gaza City, the largest city in Gaza, and some smaller towns around it, most people were driven out by the IDF when it started the ground invasion in late October last year. And about 250 or 300,000 remain there. Either they did not go south, or they went and came back because they wanted to stay where their houses were. And most of this area is in ruins. And there is a call in Israel to drive out, especially by the far right and by some far right-wing security experts, to drive out the remaining Palestinians there. arguing that Israel needs to take out the remaining Hamas force in that area and the remaining Hamas control of civilian life. So you tell everybody to leave. Those who stay are Hamas, so they become targets. And then the Roland Netanyahu says, and he said it at the United Nations again on Friday, that Israel has no plans to resettle there. This is the call of the far right to reverse the Gaza disengagement of 2005. And with the Palestinians, you know, these people say that the Palestinians squeezed into this internal exile with problems of shortages of food and electricity and infrastructure and education, eventually to drive them out to wherever country would accept them.
Looking at that now, was that the original plan?
No, I don't think so. I think the original plan of whom? Look, there was no original plan of moving the population south or driving them out of their homes. To the best of my knowledge, there was big fear of any ground operation in Gaza after the previous rounds of fighting in 2008 and 2014. And the operational plans for a much more modest operation. The plans were stolen by Hamas when they occupied the Israeli Division Command Center in near the border on October 7th. And then the new plan that was improvised on the go, including driving out the population. And that was from the Israeli standpoint, that was a game changer. That was the main strategic move. And I believe it took everybody in Gaza by surprise because they anticipated more of the same, Israel bombing. That's why they built all these tunnels, to protect themselves from the Israeli Air Force. But they had no way to prevent Israel from driving out the population. And now, almost a year, these people are out. Their homes are in ruins. Israel refuses any call to bring them back. And I think this is the biggest story in Gaza.
And do you believe Netanyahu when he says there are no plans to resettle, that he doesn't want to resettle, go back into Gaza and create settlements all over the West Bank?
Well, I separate. First of all, he said explicitly, he and any other Israeli official were saying that Israel must have full security control in Gaza. And we know from the West Bank that in 2002, after 6 years after Israel withdrew from the main Palestinian populated areas in the West Bank, it once again reoccupied them during the Second Intifada to stop the suicide bombing campaign in Israeli towns. And one of the decisions was to take full security responsibility. And full security responsibility is a very convenient euphemism for military occupation. The main difference is that in the West Bank, unlike the pre-Oslo agreement situation, Israel is not responsible for the education, for the sewage, for planning and zoning within the Palestinian towns, etc. So the Palestinian Authority has this civilian responsibility that is very much hampered by all kinds of Israeli limitations. And it has the police force, the security force that helps Israel, coordinates with Israel in most of the West Bank. And in Gaza, Israel refuses so far to bring back the Palestinian Authority. We don't know if the Palestinian Authority could replace Hamas in Gaza. But when Netanyahu insists on full security control and of controlling the border area between Gaza and Egypt, it means that Gaza would be surrendered by Israel with some chunks of territory eaten up. The question is whether Israel will try to resettle northern Gaza or areas closer to the border. It takes a long time. And by the way, even if Netanyahu says there is no plan, there might be no plan. But you know, these things, there was no plan to build all these settlements in the West Bank in 1967. And they were built. So, you know, in Israel, planning is not a very strong tenet of the Israeli culture and lifestyle. We like to improvise. This is why we're the startup nation.
That's the good part of it, the startup part.
Yeah.
Talk about what is happening in the West Bank, because there's been a lot of increased IDF activity, bulldozing of communities. What
Well,
is the strategy?
There are mostly three or maybe four refugee camps in the West Bank. You know, when we say refugee camps, these are not tents. These are small towns managed by UNRWA, by the United Nations, and not by regular civilian authority, but these are small towns. And these are the centers of resistance to Israeli occupation in the West Bank. And you have, you know, people there with arms smuggled from across the border or stolen from Israel or from the Palestinian Authority, and you know they would like to fight and terrorize Israel, both inside the Green Line and in the settlements. So the Palestinian Authority security is almost unable to operate in these areas. So you see the IDF deploying more and more force using aircraft, which it hasn't done since the Second Intifada. And so you see that massive deployment of force in these refugee camps in Jenin and Nablus, in Farah and Tulkarm. And then you see settler attacks on adjacent Palestinian villages, driving out smaller communities of shepherds from the Jordan Rift Valley. This was criticized. The only area where you see global opposition to Israel and sanctions on Israelis was regarding the West Bank settlements. And clearly, for the right-wing government, they see it as an opportunity to drive out as many Palestinians as possible from these areas outside the peripheral areas of the Palestinian presence in the West Bank. And look, Article 1 of the coalition government guidelines is saying that the Jewish people has the sole rights in the entire space of Eretz Israel, of the land of Israel. That includes the West Bank and Gaza. And they're committed to future eventual annexation of the West Bank, which Minister Smotrich is trying to do by his control over the civilian authority, which is the arm of occupation in the West Bank. And he was lobbying and still lobbying to build the same system in Gaza.
We have so many questions from our viewers. It's hard to, wow, we could go on for another 5 hours if you had the patience. This is really incredible. But let me just turn to the election here in the United States. And one of the questions is about how this might affect what this latest flare-up in Lebanon, the war in Lebanon, how that might affect the elections and vice versa. Who do Israelis want to win in November? Well,
it hasn't been polled, but clearly Netanyahu is 100% behind Donald Trump. Once again, just like the divide and conquer strategy in Israel, he does the same in the United States, where the Democratic Party is torn over Israel. You could see it in his speech to Congress. The Republicans showed up, all of them, and the Democrats, the seats were not empty because they putting staffers and people to fill the empty seats for television, but about almost a half of Democrats or 1/3 of the Democrats weren't there, including Vice President Harris. Right. So it's clear what Netanyahu would like to see. I'm not sure to what extent he believes that he could really swing, Michigan to paint Michigan red by acting in a way that would leave many Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans at home rather than vote for Harris. I'm not sure, but for Netanyahu, he would like to see Trump, not because they're such close friends, but Trump is not alone. And even if he has his issues with Netanyahu personally, his party is fully behind Israel. There were no calls to stop aid to Israel among the Republicans. And as we saw, all of them showed up to Netanyahu's speech. So they see him as one of them. Clearly that's what Netanyahu would like to see. He would like to see the Republicans win back the Senate. This is the America that he's speaking to. And this is the kind of Israel that he's speaking to. Obviously, it's not the same, but and the issues are different, but it's the same mentality, the same kind of political grand design or
But how
worldview.
do you expect policy change? Because the Democrats and at least the mainstream part of the Democratic Party that's in control of the party and Harris have indicated no change in the United States as full-throated support of Israel.
Well, with the exception of the supply of 2,000-pound bombs for use in Gaza, we saw them just used against Nasrallah in Lebanon. The Democrats supported Israel just the same. But for example, would Trump extend the sanctions on the violent settlers or throw them out? This is, this doesn't need any congressional approval or anything. Or with Trump, Israel could trust vetoing any UN resolution against the war 100%. With Biden, especially if in a transition period, he could act differently. And these changes mean a lot. And the Trump administration would be more aggressive against the ICC and its threat to issue arrest warrants to Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. And the list goes on and on.
It seems that we are as far away from a two-state solution as ever. Is anybody at all aside? Well, Ehud Olmert has come up with a plan with a former foreign minister for the PA to create a two-state solution and to bring in an Arab peacekeeping force in Gaza and for wealthy governments, including the United States, to contribute to rebuilding Gaza. As you say, it's in ruins, northern Gaza. Any of that have any chance of being taken seriously by the key players?
Well, first of all, on the ground, it appears as far as ever. At the same time, we know that after wars, Israeli public opinion is more open to peace initiatives, and we saw it after the Yom Kippur War. We saw it after the Gulf War, when we were hit by Iraqi missiles, and we've seen it after the first and second intifadas with Oslo and the Gaza disengagement. So that might happen. At this point, the Palestinian Authority has very low credibility to Israelis, and we see that even the opposition politicians are very scared of lobbying or promoting the two-state solution. Former Prime Minister Olmert is out of office. He's not running for office again. And he did a very brave thing because the active politicians are afraid of even touching the issue. And it's hard to have to be the bearer of good news here on the two-state solution. On the other hand, what other solution is there to, if not to solve the conflict, at least to mitigate it?
But it doesn't appear that
because we saw that by ignoring the Palestinians, locking them up and throwing the key away, as Israel tried to do in Gaza, eventually they take the risk and it explodes in our faces. And I don't think that Israel is in better shape than it was on October 6th. So ignoring the Palestinians, which is not just the government, not just Netanyahu, not just the right wing. I think that for 15 years, and Netanyahu was the epitome of it, for 15 years, we deluded ourselves that the conflict is a thing of the past, that we could just ignore the Palestinians and throw away the key, and we could deal with occasional outbursts of violence and just develop the economy and fly low cost to Europe. And what the war did and still does to the Israeli mindset that we are kind of a Western bastion in the Middle East was that the neighborhood came back. We realized that we are part of the neighborhood, and we're not part of the West in the same way that we're just looking westwards and equating anything in Israel to NASDAQ or to Harvard or to Western Europe. that was shattered, and that's a major blow to secular and liberal Israelis who realized that you cannot just ignore the conflict as if it's not there. And that was the Netanyahu promise, that Israel could prosper and ignore the conflict, manage the conflict at low level. I think that this is shattered. But so one day the two-state solution will come back. We saw Vice President candidate Harris speaking about it, and Biden, and even Trump. The deal of the century by Trump was also a kind of two-state solution. And if you read the Israeli public opinion polls, when the issue is raised, when it tied up with a more regional peace with Saudi Arabia and so on, there is more support. But so far, no politician is willing to raise it. And Netanyahu, the main difference between his last year's speech, last year he said that we were on the cusp of making peace with Saudi Arabia, and that the Palestinians don't matter, they're only 2% of the Arab world, they should not have a veto over it. This year was just saying that we need peace with Saudi Arabia, that could be such a great thing, but he made no promises that it was behind the corner, and it keeps ignoring the Palestinians. The map of the Middle East that he showed at the UN has no two-state solution. It has Israel from the river to the sea.
Right. That is a good note to end on, or at least a realistic note to end on. Thank you very much for joining us today. I really
Thank
appreciate
you, and we'll watch the election.
Yeah,
Your election is coming soon.
should be interesting. Okay, and hope to have you back soon. Thank you all
Thanks.
for joining us this morning, and join us again tomorrow at 5 o'clock Pacific for a conversation with the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns. I'm Madeleine Brand, and I will see you soon.